Welcome back to the live shir. After a few weeks of a little break because of Hanukkah, we're back.
We still had classes.
Still had classes, right? Not live. Not in person. We're happy to be back. Bezrat Hashem. This is beginning tonight. Is the beginning of Asara B'Tevet. Hopefully, Bezrat Hashem by tomorrow. Then we will no longer need the Asara B'Tevet fast. We'll be actually seeing the Geula, Bezrat Hashem.
Amen.
And one of the things that we'll talk about tonight is about what is worth the value of extra work, the value of doing something extra for other people, and perhaps we should all do one extra thing for everyone else around the Am Yisrael. So perhaps that will help us all see the redemption a little faster.
Amen. Also to Ariel Ben Dorit, Charles Floyd special, just to do Bikkur Cholem.
Yep.
Have a full Shlema.
Amen.
And this is the kind of love and chesed people have around here.
So this week's Parshat is Parshat Vayechi, the last in Sefer Bereshit. I heard that the idea of this whole Parsha, the whole Parshat Vayechi is about Chazak. At the beginning of the Parsha, starts when Yaakov gets stronger, Vayit Chazek, to al mitah. He gets to get stronger because he sees Yosef, and we end obviously with Chazak, Vayit Chazek, and then also in the Haftorah, it also mentions the idea of getting it stronger, Lit Chazek, and Bezrat Hashem, we should also get stronger. And if you look at all the three times that it mentions, it's nothing big, right? But Yaakov, when he gets strong, he doesn't do like a big movement when Yosef comes. He does this a small movement. He just gets, instead of being lying down, he sits up straight. A little bit of movement makes a huge difference in terms of what influence we can have. So maybe just for ourselves, we should just say as we get closer. We get closer to the Geula and get closer to new things and opportunities. We should all just think about what we can do. Small things, small movements make big differences and big impact. So we're just about to start the Zera Shimshon Drush Dalid on Parshat Vayechi. And so we are, as we know, last week, at the end of last week's Parsha, Yosef and the brothers are starting. Yaakov was already moved down to Mitzrayim in last week's parsha, and now we know Drush Dalid in Parshat Vayechi, and we know now that the Yaakov his days are numbered, and that's the beginning of this week's parsha. And it says Vayechi Yaakov, right? Eretz Mitzrayim is Parashat Sana, and he realizes that his days are numbered, and now he's starting to close up all his affairs, as they say. Excuse me, and he calls Yosef in, and he wants to make sure that he doesn't get buried in Mitzrayim, but rather he gets buried in Eretz Yisrael. And that was the Drush Dalid, is short, but it's also a nice idea of how we can approach this whole idea of that, and it's a fine reading of the psukim that happen in this at the beginning of this week's parsha. So as it says in the beginning of this week's parsha, it says, Simna yadcha tachat yirechi v'asita imadi chesed ve'emet. Right, it says that you should. It said the whole pasuk is imna matzati chen beinecha. Right, if you please find favor in my eyes, Simna yadcha tachat yirechi. Make a vow by putting your hand under my hip, which was the time similar to what Eliezer and Abraham did. V'asita imadi chesed was a sign of shuvah, and said, please do for me a chesed and an emet. I'll not take berini b'Mitzrayim. Don't bury me in Mitzrayim. And Rashi says there, Vishavali. Right? He says, make a vow to me, swear to me, make an oath. Kasheh. Right? He says, Lama Yosef lo nishba lo miyad. Shutzrach Yaakov lachzor lomar lo hishavali. Right? So Rashi on the spot of Simna yadcha tachat yirechi, Rashi says, make an oath or a shvuah. And then why the question that the Zera Shimshon has is, why did Yosef not make an oath right away? And therefore, if he didn't, how do we know that he didn't? Because we write afterwards, a few psukim later, it says, "Hishavali, make an oath to me." So therefore, im tomar Yosef nishba lo miyad shamar lo simna yadcha tachat yirechi im ken lama chazer Yaakov lomar shavali trei shvuot lamali. So the Zera Shimshon asks both sides of the question. In Torah Dalet, we just started. In the beginning of this week's parsha, as it says, it begins with Yaakov asking Yosef to swear to him. Simna yadcha tachat yirechi. Rashi there says, promise me. which would be obvious. We should know that already from the language, Simna Yadcha Tachet Yerechi from Parshat Chayei Sarah with Eliezer and Avraham. And then so the question is, why didn't Yosef make a promise right away? And how do we know that we didn't make a promise right away? Because Yaakov, 2 psukim later, says, Hishav Ali, right? So that's proof already. And if we say that that's one side of the coin, the other side of the coin is if we say Yosef did indeed swear to him right away, then why does it say Hishav Ali? Why do we have to say he'd make me a promise again? So either we're looking at it saying that Yosef did make a promise right away, and therefore we have to ask the question, why does he have to say it twice? Or we have to say the question is, why did Yosef not swear right away? Therefore, that Yaakov has to ask the question twice. Right. So either way we look at it, similar question, but it's clear that the psukim are telling us something, and the Zera Shimshon is going to highlight a nice little idea about what's going on here and the conversation. It's really about the conversation between Yaakov and Yosef and what's going, the backstory.
Right, so the Parshat doesn't say Vishavali.
It does, sure it does.
The second, why does Rashi say Vishavali?
That's the question. So he's asking why.
Why does he have to say
Right. Why does it seem Simna Yadcha Tachet Yerechi? Right.
It was like a second time.
Right. No, he's right. He's saying is if Rashi says Simna Yadcha, in case we forgot, Rashi says Hishav Ali, make a promise to me. Right. So if that's the case, then why does Yaakov in the 2 psukim later have to say Hishav Ali? Right. In other words, Simna Yadcha Tachet Yerechi we know is Lashon Shuvah. But just in case we don't know, Rashi says Lashon Shuvah. Okay, great. So now we know it's an oath. So then why does Yaakov have to repeat himself, say, make a swear to me? Right? Why does he have to say that 2 psukim later? Or we could say is maybe because Yosef didn't make a promise right away, which is okay, but then what's going on here? There's something doesn't make sense to have 2 promises, 2 psukim in between, 2 psukim away from each other. So he says, "V'od kasheh shemitchila Yaakov amar simna l'shon bakasha." Right? If we look at the words carefully in the psukim says simna, make it nice. He does it nicely. He asks, request nicely. Simna, please place your hand here. Kilu mevakesh hadavar mishnochri derech mitziat chen. Right? He's trying to ask favor or find favor in someone's eyes. So he says, please do this for me. V'achar shamar Yosef anochi esek darecha az amar lo bilshon tzivu yishav ali kmo shu derech ha'av l'tzavot levno. He says another question. Question number 1 we understand is, or it's like one question with 2 sides. He says question number 1 is why does Yaakov say twice make a promise to make a shvuah? The second question is why does Yaakov say simna? He's asking it in a nice format, a polite format, right? And then only after Yosef says anochi asek dvarecha, which you would think means yes, okay, I'll do it. Right? He says, then Yaakov goes a little stronger and he says, Hishav Ali, means like he forcefully says, do it now. Right? That's like he says, like a father would command, instruct his son, he's doing that in the second time, not in the first time. Right? That's question number 2. If you look at the words, why do you have to say Hishav Ali? There's only conversations between Yaakov and Yosef. So why do you have to say Hishav Ali to me? Right? In other words, you could just say Yishava, or you could just say, you don't have to say to make a promise to me. You could have just said Yishava or Tishba or whatever it is, but you don't have to say to me because there's only 2 people in the room, right? So he's asking. It's in English you would say make the promise. You don't have to say you make the promise, right? You don't have to say that when only 2 people are talking, right? You just say promise. Do you promise? Right? You don't have to say to promise to me. You could say do you promise, right? So those are the questions. 3 relatively. I'd say easy or straightforward questions. Nothing here is being brought down from like Midrashim or anything, which is sometimes the Zera Shimshon's approach. And here he said, now he offers an answer. This is one Torah. It's a little short. We're going to do another short Torah as well. Hopefully we'll have time for it, maybe even a third. We'll see. Looking back last year, this is the first time I believe that Charles initiated the idea of having short Divrei Torah instead of long ones, right around this time. Right, instead of having one long one, sometimes people get lost or distracted. You have short ones that people can be more focused, and it kind of gives people something to take home with them for Shabbat. V'yesh lomar. So the answer that he starts with, he says, V'yesh lomar shemitchila lo haya yachol Yaakov letzavot leYosef b'tzivui gamur shelo yikbareu b'Mitzrayim. So he says that we have to start off by understanding that Yaakov knew the situation. Yaakov knew how to read the room. He realized that Yosef, even though he is number 2 in command in Mitzrayim, he still can't make the final decision. He doesn't have the ability to say, okay, Dad, you want me to go, Abba, you want me to bury you in Eretz Yisrael? No problem, I got it. It's on me. Right? He couldn't do that. He knows that he has to still ask Paro. And there's a chance that Paro may say, no way. So he says, "Sharei lavi didei Yosef tal yamita." Right? It's not in Yosef's. Is the word? The final decision or the final word isn't in Yosef's hand. The tilma paro lo yitain lo reshut likavro be'eretz Yisrael. Right? He says maybe Paro will say, "No way." Ela adraba yirtzeh shikbaru b'Mitzrayim. Like we know last week's parsha already, Yaakov gives Paro a bracha, and it's no secret in the time of Yaakov and Paro and Yosef that Yaakov was known as a well-respected individual around the world. So the opposite, the Mitzrayim might say, "No way, we want the power of this tzaddik." There are many stories of that throughout time where this tzaddik dies hundreds of years beforehand, but people still go to his kever, they donate money in his honor. People, non-Jews, my wife's grandfather, yeah.
There's those,
Right, and then my wife's grandfather, who's his great grandfather was a big Rav, the Rebbe of Premishlan and several other ones, and the non-Jews still give money at his kever many years, like hundreds of years later, almost about 20 years ago he visited, or 30 years already, he visited, and they were still going. They were still going to the kever, saying, because this is a great man, a great scholar, and he blesses our land. So it's no secret that Yaakov the Mitzrayim would want Yaakov to stay there. So he knows. He says that the Zera Shimshon continues, and he says it wouldn't be respectful for a father to command his son to say you have to do something if he knows that the final decision is not really in the son's hands. So he said it wouldn't be respectful. So he says the first time he says, "Ve'elachein amar lo b'lashon bakasha she'yishava lo la'asot kol ma'amatzei kocho l'shtadel hazeh kedei sheParo yitain lo reshut." So he says the first time around. Now, when you look at the words of the psukim, they start to make a little more sense. He says, "Simna yadcha tachat yirechi." Please do it nicely, right? And he says, "Please do it," and he's asking nicely, and the words are much more calming. He says, "Because I know at the end of the day you're not in control. I'm asking you nicely. Do what you can." V'Yosef hashiv anochi esek dvarecha, right? And he says, "I'm going to do like you told me," right? He says, right? I will not, but he says, "I will do what you said." But he doesn't say what? He doesn't say, "I'm going to swear." What did Yaakov tell Yosef? Simna yadcha tachat yirechi means make a swear, right? That's the ultimate sign of a swear is doing that. So he says he should have said what? Vayalo lomar rak anochi eseh. But too low. He shouldn't have said, "I'm going to do what you said." I should just say, "I'll do it." Right? You're not going to say, "I do as you said." And Yaakov understood that. Elakach ratzah Yosef l'rmoz Yaakov. This is what the Zera Shimshon says. A nice little, fine tune and understanding. Shadavar yeh kidvaro shel Yaakov shediber b'lashon kisheh bakasha lefi shadavar talu b'dat Paro. He says, "I'm going to do what you said," meaning I'll try. Right? I guarantee it. Right? Exactly. But Yaakov didn't want the "I try" answer. He wanted the "Yes, I'll do it." And he said, "I'm going to do what you said." Aval im Paro lo yotzel yitain lo reshut ein kam makom lishaval lasot kol ma'amatzei kocho she'eino dim la'arbot haftzarot lemelech v'ashvuah tiyeh b'teilah b'ikara. So he says the reason why the first time around Yaakov is saying, "I want you to swear to me," or swear. Excuse me. But Yosef says, "I'll do what you say. I'll try." Right? That Yaakov understands it as "I'll try. I'll try my best." Now, a father doesn't want, when he's on his deathbed, a father doesn't want to hear, "I'll try my best." He wants to hear him say, "I'm doing it." Right? Like, "Yes." And he says, "No, I'm going to do my best." And Yaakov says, I don't want that. I'll try my best.
But it kind of contradicts.
Right.
It contradicts the first part.
That's exactly what we're going to get to that in a second.
He says on one hand he's asking because he knows that he can't always promise it. So then when Yosef follows that logic,
right.
He's like, you should promise.
So hold on a second. You're going to get to the second part in a second, where the second part of the Zera Shimshon's idea follows that idea, that concept, and that direction. So he says that Yaakov said, "Please try," and Yosef responds saying, "I will do as you asked." And Yaakov understood that as, "Okay, you're going to try." And he says, but the reason Yosef's logic was, if you look at it, the Zera Shimshon is trying to say is what both sides of logic are. Yaakov is saying is, try your best, or do your, I want you to do it. I want you to make me a swear, or an oath. But the problem is that Yosef knows that it wouldn't be possible for him to make an oath, because God forbid, if Paro says no, then the oath between him and his son, or his son and him, is still hanging there, but he can't do anything about it.
The oath could be that he'll try his best.
Right. So that may be what that one is one answer. But it says, but he'd rather know that the first time around Yosef is trying to say to Yaakov, I'm not going to swear to you, but I'm going to try my best, because if I swear to you and then it doesn't come true, then it's not respectful to you, Dad, that I just made a swear to you and I can't uphold the promise. I can't uphold that promise. So I don't want to make a swear. I don't want to do it. I'd rather just say, I'll do my best, right? Because then if you understand the logic of what Yosef is coming from, you could also understand where Yaakov is coming from. Yaakov is saying he's trying to be nice and kind because he realizes that maybe at the end of the day, Yosef is not in control. So Yosef is not in control, and therefore he was trying to tell him, go hard, go strong, but I don't want you to swear yet, right? He's still telling him, I want you to make a strong promise, but not a swear, because God forbid if the oath doesn't, if the oath is not, for some reason, can't be fulfilled, there's no real oath, it's not binding. But the other side to that is, Lachen amar lo Yaakov hishava li lasot hadavar hazeh. And then you go back, now you look at the second part of the pasuk, or the second part of the whole conversation, and this is why Yaakov goes back and says, Hishava li lasot hadavar. He says, now I want you to make a promise. He says the first time around, maybe Yosef was like, all right, I got it, I'll do my best, end of story. And Yaakov was like, no, because if you say I'll do my best and you get a no, what's going to happen? It's over, right? And then what happens? Yaakov gets buried in Mitzrayim, and the story's over. Right? And Yaakov is saying, no. I want you to do, I tried once to be nice and polite, to say, I realize it's not in your complete control, but I really want you to do more than that. Like, I really want to twist your arm and make you kind of be even more than that. So what does he say? Sha'az lo yuchal lo yuchal paro l'ma'en, k'mo she'amar ala pasuk, alei ukvor et avicha kasher yishbecha. Right? Zot hashvuah hu tikun v'aitzah she'natan Yosef kedei she'paro yeh muchrach litain lo reshut k'mo she'amru Chazal. So we look at the Gemara in Sota, the very famous Gemara, but it's also the psukim we say actually on Thursday. What do we say? Svat, right? What do you say? We say Svat lo yodat edut b'Yosef. Right? And what do we say? Svat lo yodati. Right? So Safa lo yodati. What does it mean? It means that Yosef knew one language over Paro. Actually, the Gemara says that. Gemara says that Yosef knew one language, which was Hebrew, over Paro. Paro knew many languages, but he didn't know Hebrew. And when Yosef came into power, Paro made him swear that he'll never reveal the fact that he has one language above him. Okay, so that's the
story beforehand was with the Militz.
Right, the Militz.
To say that
right.
they don't know.
Right.
As though he doesn't understand.
Exactly. So now, if you look here, the Psukir, he says, Yaakov says to him, after the first attempt, he says, try hard. The second time, he says, now I want you to swear to me. And what does he say? He says, I want you to do it in a way that Paro will never say, well, there's no chance for Paro to say no, right? The make him an offer he can't refuse kind of thing. And what does he mean? In the Gemara there, in Sota, as I mentioned, Daf Lamed Vav says that Paro knew that Yosef has an edge on him. So now Yaakov is saying whether Yaakov knew that Paro, that Yosef had an edge on him or not was not clear, but at least Yaakov says do what you can, meaning hint, I want you to swear to me because I want you to really make it impossible for him to say no. What is he really trying to say? He's saying whatever you have on him, this is the chance to use it, meaning respect me, and for my lifelong respect, or of me, I want you to take everything, do everything you can. The first time I asked you, I was trying to be nice. You said I'll do what I can. That's not enough for me. I'm your father. I want you to do everything that you can, everything in your power. So now he says, and look what he says. He says, what could happen even if, let's say Yosef goes to Paro, right? And he tries his best. He does everything he can. He uses all his efforts. But what happens? Paro can still do what? He can still say no. He's the king, right? So he says, no. He says, then what happens? Then we have a big problem. Now, at this situation, Yaakov says, swear to me. Then the first time he's kind of hinting to the swear. So he'd say, well, I didn't really promise. I made an oath. Here, this time he's like, Hishavali, make a promise to me. Swear to me. And if you say to swear to me, and then Paro says no, then we're in real trouble. So he says, L'chach hosef tivat li, klomar hishavali. He says, make a swear to me. Why does he say to make a promise to me? He says, al dati, va'ani ein dati shetachul hashva ela ksheiten lecha paro reshut. He says, I want you to make a promise to me. Meaning between father and son, make a promise. we should make a promise. So that way, in case Paro, for whatever reason, denies you of the ability, it's not like that we have this hanging dark cloud over us between a father and son. You did everything you can, but even so, the oath is only between us two, and not as opposed to an oath that's very hard to undo, especially when the person passes away, right? 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 He says it sounds like an oath. Right? If you say, when we read the psukim, it sounds hishavali. It sounds like make a promise to make a promise. Right? That's what he's between me and you. Right? Because that way, if in case Paro says no, there's no big deal. Right? Ukshamar lo Paro zil itchel ashvuach amar le itchel nami adidach kedamrin perik sota. Right? If we look at the sota, what happens in the story there in Sota, Gemara Sota, not Perik Sota. Gemara there says that Paro says to Yosef, undo the shvuah, undo the swear. Right? He says, I don't want you, because he knows, Yosef tells him the story, what happened with his father, and he says, my father made me promise, made an oath. So he says, undo the oath. So Yosef says to him, if you want me to undo that oath, then undo the oath that I have one language above you, and I'm going to tell everyone about that. So he says, So he says, what happened? So that's how Yosef twisted Paro's hand. He basically, he forced his hand. He had no choice. Paro didn't want to look like a fool in front of his nation and say.
That's why when he said, Kasher
exactly, that's why it says, Kasher Shbiachad, because he says, how did you swear? Because he says, just like you swore to your father. So that's what the Gemara says there. The Gemara says there that exactly that. He says, Paro was stuck. Paro had no choice but to say yes, because he realized that if Yosef says to him, if you want me to undo this promise with my father, I'm going to do undo the other promise between me and you. And guess what happens when I undo that? You, Paro, look like a fool. So Yaakov is telling Yosef, make me a promise so that way between me and you we're good, and between you and what a guest of honor. And he says, so Yaakov and Yosef Yaakov is telling Yosef, make a promise between us two. And in my eyes, it's just between us two. So that way there's no real strong promise if Paro says no. But Yaakov is also telling Yosef that I want you, Yosef, to do everything you can and use your power to your best abilities. This is where you play all your cards. So in what we learn from here is that Yaakov realizes that first we take a step back and we look at the psukim, where on just the end of Drush Daled, the psukim read as if it's one long promise, but the Zera Shimshon understands it as actually two parts of the same conversation. The conversation is that Yaakov at first tries to ask nicely for Yosef to do everything he can. Yosef says, yeah, I'll try, Dad, no matter what you say, I'll try. And Yaakov doesn't understands it to say, oh, you're going to try. That doesn't mean that you're really going to give it all your effort. And therefore he repeats the words, Hishavali. Hishavali means to make a swear to me, make an oath to me. But even when he says make an oath to me, he's saying is make an oath that's between you and me, and not even though it sounds like an oath that everyone thinks it's a shvuah that's binding, it's really just a shvuah between father and son, so that in the event that Paro says no, Yosef and Yaakov are still good, and there's no this whole problem of undoing a shvuah, right? There's nothing hanging. However, what Yaakov is really hinting to Yosef, he's saying is, Yosef, whatever you can do to make sure that this promise comes through, I need you to do. And this is when, if you look at the Gemara in Sota, it says that when Yosef and Paro are having the conversation about this oath, right? And as you mentioned, Dov mentioned the pasuk, which is a few psukim later, where Paro says to him, "Okay, like you promised, like you swore." And how did he know he swore? Unless Yosef told him. And that's what in the conversation where the Gemara mentions, he says, "Yeah, my father and I swore," and Paro says to him, "Go undo that swear." And Yosef says, twists his arm and says, "No. If you want me to undo that swear, then I'm going to do the other oath, which you and I have, which is wink, wink. You no longer have the power over me, right? I really have one up on you." And therefore, Yosef is really basically doing, on both sides, he's fulfilled the oath with his father, and he's also fulfilled the oath, he's also making sure that Paro can't say no. So he's looking like he has a very nice, and it looks all like packaged nicely, but it's also a very interesting way to read the psukim, because most people read it as one long context of story. But the way the Zera Shimshon, there are other people who read it that way, but most of them kind of say it's just more of a back and forth, less of a two-step process. One is, in this case, he's reading it as, first time I'm asking you nicely, second time I'm commanding you, and the commandment is, it's a strong commandment, and I want you to do everything you can, and Yosef does pick up on that language. So
It's
that
all actually because he had to explain what is the chiddush of Rashi. Because
Right.
It's important to remember
Right.
this whole discussion started, like, even if every person who learned the previous with Eliezer knows
Right.
that Simna Yadcha Tachat Yerechi means Shvuah.
Right.
So what is Rashi coming along and saying,
Exactly.
oh, by the way, therefore he has to explain.
Right.
the whole thing.
So either he's saying it. Well, your point is good. Your point is good. The only thing I would say to that is, if anyone's learned, if amen, and if anyone's ever learned, or anyone who's not, if anyone who's learned Chumash once, can kind of start making connection between words, then you would say, okay, he said Simna Yadcha Tachat Yerechi. He'd go back and you realize that it's a Shavua. However, even then, even going back to the psukim about Eliezer, even in that case,
It's not so clear.
it's not so clear, exactly. So that's why your point about Rashi saying Rashi has to explain it, saying I want you to make an oath. But if that means that Rashi has to explain it, that means it's not clear in the psukim, which means that even if I identify the language there and here and make a connection between the two, it's not necessarily clear that it's like a binding oath. It's just an oath. It's saying I'm going to try my best.
So
Then the second part is Ahishav Ali is saying I want a binding oath.
But then that whole discussion of the Zera Shimshon falls.
Why?
Because the whole reason that the Zera Shimshon is bringing up all these questions
Is
because it's obvious.
is that what the way you read it? Let me see.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Simna Yad Ahishav Ali. Kasher Lama Yosef Lo Nishba Lo Miyad.
Right, guy, you skipped.
No,
Pirash Rashi.
Pirash Rashi, right? Ahishav Ali, right?
So the kasher, meaning, he doesn't explicitly say that.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But he says, pasuk, Simna Yadcha, Pirash Rashi, Ahishav Ali.
Right.
So he's kind of saying.
Right, he's saying that these words mean to Rashi's just saying is what is Simna Yadcha? He could have just said is Kamosh Inu Be'eliezer or whatever.
Right.
He doesn't say that, right? He's just saying is in case this is the first time you've ever read Chumash before your life, right? This means a lashon shvuah, right? To remind just to remind you that it's a lashon shvuah. But like you said, he has to ask the question is if I don't know that it's a lashon shvuah, Rashi helps me understand that. If I do know, then what is the chidush that Rashi's making? So that's what you're asking. That's a good point. Good point. Right. Okay. So either way, a quick, short Torah about the conversation between the two.
It was interesting because in the end it was Makayim. The Shavua was Makayim. It kind of shows you the Koach of the whole back and forth. Brought out the reality that even the biggest power in the world can hold back
Right.
the will of the Sadak. Yaakov's will was Makayim through his son,
Well,
through Shavua, with a Koach of bringing it into reality.
Well, so what I think he's saying here is that Yaakov wanted something, and he said to his son, "You got to do whatever it takes, right? Whatever it takes." And whether he knew about Yosef having this one up on Paro or not, I don't know. But
it was today that it was Makayim. He only got buried on the 10th of Tavis.
Oh yeah,
That's according to the Chosim Sofer.
I don't know. I didn't know that. Okay. Anyway, either which way, so that's the first one.
He was in Eretz Yisrael, but it took a while.
Okay, so now, where are we looking? We're now going to do, hold on, which is the next one. This one is a little longer, so I'll try not to go in. He says here, so he says, right. Okay, so we're going to do number Hey, Ot Hey. The next drush is Hey. Again, this is back and forth, a conversation between Yaakov and Yosef. Another short drush, but I think it's a really nice idea. It also gives us, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, in the introduction, the drush really highlights an idea of going above and beyond what you're asked to do, and that extra, you get schar, you get more schar for what you do above and beyond, than you get the schar for the standard, the standard mitzvah, the standard process. So if we look, and this is also, again, a very straightforward and a good question that most of us probably didn't think about, but it's a great question. So he says here, pasuk in the pasuk when he says hey, so it says the pasuk says imna matzati chen beinecha, right? If you find favor in my eyes, simna yadcha tachet yerechi, right? Place your hand and make an oath, as Rashi said, va'asita imadi chesed ve'emet, right? Do a chesed and emet, like a long, as we know, nowadays people who are in the Chevra Kadisha or whatever, they're called chesed shel emet. Right, the ultimate chesed, because you never can get repaid. Rashi, what does Rashi say here? And that's what the Zera Shimshon starts with. Right, chesed ve'emet, chesed shosimi memetim, hu chesed shel emet, sheno mitzapeh letashlum gmul. Right, so that Rashi, relatively famous Rashi, and Rashi says, don't, with no expectation of return. I'm doing the chesed with the deceased or the person who died, right? I'm not looking for payment. I'm not looking for someone to give me back and say a thank you. I'm doing it the ultimate good. That's what we usually say. Hikshua mefarshim, sharei Rashi atzmo katav lekaman. Rashi says, most of the mefarshim ask this question, and they say, when you look later on, what does Rashi say? Vani natati l'chashchem echad al achecha. Rashi says there, Lefi she'ata toreach litasek b'kvurati, v'gam ani natati l'cha nachla shetikaver ba. Right? Rashi himself, later on, when Yaakov tells Yosef that I'm going to give you Shechem, which is one piece, one portion of your lot.
Right,
well, yeah, but but either way, but Rashi's problem, if he would have said it's because of Ephraim and Menashe, then we wouldn't have a question. Rashi says here is because you worked hard to bury me. So it sounds like Rashi in one place is saying, I don't expect to get it, chesed shalamet, I don't expect a reward. And then the second place Rashi, it says, no, I'm giving you a reward right now because you're dealing with me, you're burying me. Right? So it seems like there's a contradiction in Rashi. Obviously, there's no contradiction, and the Zera Shimshon is going to offer his insight as to why there's no contradiction. Imkain, right? He says, Imkain, if that's the case, the two Rashis seem to contradict each other, and then there's no more chesed shalamet. There's no real, true chesed anymore. Sharei shilemo gmulo shenatano nachala. He says, well, you just paid him. He says, Yaakov says to Yosef, I'm going to give you one portion greater than everyone else. So if he would have just said it's because you have two sons and whatever, that's great. That would make sense, and then we'd be fine. But here he says, no, it's because you worked so hard. Therefore, Rashi, Zera Shimshon, and many Mefarshim have this question as to what is going on here and how could it be a contradiction. So, or they seem to be contradiction. Right. So he says, "V'nireh lomar." So he says, "She'Yaakov lo tziva li Yosef elo shelo yikberu b'Mitzrayim." Right. According to the Pshat of right, he says Yaakov just tells Yosef, or Yosef is commanded by Yaakov to just say, "Don't bury me in Mitzrayim." That's the Pshat. That's the letter of. I want you to do is just don't. Whatever you got to do, don't bury me in Mitzrayim. Elo sheYosef ratzah lahosif ala mitzvah. Yosef wanted to add. Just like his name, Yosef, right? He wants to add to the mitzvah. And if you look in Od Vav, you see that why did Yosef specifically want? We'll get maybe we'll be able to do it. But either way, if we look at Od Vav, which is a nice piece, Yosef says, "I want to deal with this mitzvah by myself." Meaning, he's not just Yaakov is not asking Yosef to just bury him. That's one thing. That's the mitzvah. That's the black and white mitzvah. Right? Father asks his son, make sure I don't get buried in Mitzrayim. Yosef says, I'm going to do one more. I'm going to take it. I'm going to do it all by myself. Sure, I have workers. I have my other brothers that want to be involved. No. This is on me. I want to do this one. Right? So he says, based the black and white halacha or the black and white mitzvah that he was told, the request
was to ensure that
he doesn't get buried in Mitzrayim. That's the law, right? What happens when someone goes above the law? Then he gets paid for something else. The law, that's the chesed shalamet, right? That's the basic law, basic mitzvah, let's call it. כשהיה יעקב בסוף ימיו ראה מה שעתיד להיות, שנאמר הנה אנוכי מת והיה אלוהים עמכם והשיב אתכם אל ארץ אבותיכם וראה שעתיד יוסף להתעסק בגבורתו, אז אמר לו ואני נתתי לך שכם אחד על אחיך. Right? So he says, now if we look at the psukim a little bit more, we see that the psukim read a little bit differently. Right? The way the psukim are, there's a little bit of a pause in between the two sets of psukim. So, set number one is, I want you, don't bury me in Mitzrayim. Commandment. Like, all right, that's my request. Right? That's full stop. So for that, you get the chesed shalamet. That's what Rashi is saying, it's chesed shalamet. Then Yaakov sees what's going to happen and how the story unfolds. And he realizes that later on, down the line, Yosef is also, and all the sons are going to be taken, all Shivtei Yaakov are going to be taken out of Mitzrayim. So what happens? That is that they're all going to pass away, and all the bones, that is all the bodies come out and go to Mitzrayim. So go out of Mitzrayim and go to Eretz Yisrael. This is when Yaakov says, oh, you're dealing with the mitzvah of dealing with it yourself. That's what I'm giving you. The extra work I'm giving you an extra piece. It's not that they're not connected, Originally, we thought that what we would say is like the Havamina is that we think that these two Rashis are connected and contradict each other. The Zera Shimshon is saying no. One is just what he gets, the schar that he gets, or let's call it the not schar that he gets for doing the mitzvah or doing the actual, the request that Yaakov gets. That's chesed shalamet. That's the ultimate chesed. But the second part, which is what he's doing above and beyond, which is he's taking for himself and he's trying to do everything he can by himself, that Yaakov says, for the extra hard work you get, the bonus is you're going to get an extra piece of land. So Rashi's not contradicting himself, but rather he's saying is one is for the letter of the law and one is when you go above the law, right? And now he says, right? And if we look at as he says here, we know that Yosef, as the second in command, the fact that Yosef, as the second in command of Mitzrayim, takes it upon himself, he says, I'm going to do this all on me. That's a special kavod for the father, but also it shows the people what's going to happen. He's saying, I'm willing to do all of the work, even though I don't have to, right? Where do we learn this from? Who else did that?
Well,
Abraham, very good.
And also, what's his name? No?
Abraham did it, we know. But
yeah, but what was the name of the Navi? No? Parshat?
now you're getting, you stuck me.
Give us a hint.
Bilam? No.
Bilam.
Bilam, right.
Bilam.
So Avram, both are Bilam and Avram are both quoted in both cases. Very good. Rashi quotes in both cases. Right. Rashi quotes the Midrash that says. Right. So in both cases, Avram could have said what? He had Avadim. We knew that. We know we have Avadim. Right. Now he had the sons. He had the children with him, or the workers, employees, whatever you want to call it. Now Rav with him, and he says, no, I'm going to do this myself because of the love of Hashem. Right, that's what Rashi says there. The love for Hashem destroys all standard operating procedures. The same thing, lahefech, right? The same thing, the opposite, right? Lahavdil is with Bilam. Bilam says the same thing. He says, no, I'm vayachavosh et chamaro. In both cases, that's where the hekesh is made. Rashi says it in both cases. One says, ava mekalkelet ashura, and one says, sidan mekalkelet ashura. Very good. So here Yosef says, I'm doing this. I'm going to break all the regular standard operating procedures, and I'm going to break it and say I'm doing it myself. For that, Yaakov says, for that, I want to give you something extra. I'm not giving you extra for what I commanded you. That I can't do. I can't give you that. But I can give you something for what you're taking upon yourself above and beyond. And like what it says here, what's that?
Why doesn't it spoil the Shalamet that he's getting another portion?
Because the Chesed Shalamet is, Yaakov says to him, it's as if to say, I want you to do something for me. I'm asking you to do something for me. Okay, I need a cake. Go buy me, let's make it easy. For Shabbos, go buy me a challah. All right, so you can either do what? You go to the store, you buy me a challah, say, tell me how much it is. Story's over, right? Okay. But you say, you know what? Oh, you need one challah? Oh, that means you probably need 2 challahs, or you need 3 challahs. Oh, you're a guy who likes pesto. I'm going to find you the best pesto challah out there with, freshly baked. I'm going to bring it to your house, and you're going to be like, whoa. I'm not going to give you the 5 shekel that the challah costs. I'm going to give you the 30 shekel for all the extra hard work and everything. But whatever. I don't know. My wife makes fun. Anyways, but I'll give you a good example. Here's a really good example, actually. There's a story about Rav Moshe Feinstein. No, thank you. Rav Moshe Feinstein once was asked, I think it was Rav Moshe Feinstein. If it's not, I hope I'll say the name of a gadol instead just to make sure. But he was once asked, this poor woman goes to him and says, Can I be yotzei the 4 kosot of wine on milk? Okay, that's the question. Now, what is Moshe? What a normal Rav, like someone who's like straightforward, would say, yes or no. Black or white, he says, yes, you can, no, you can't. But Rav Moshe Feinstein, when understood, he said, wait a minute. If she's asking that question, what is she really asking?
I need some money.
I don't have money to buy wine, so therefore what? I can only afford milk. So he goes out and he gives her money. And he goes out and gives her money. So that's the example here. He's saying the question is yes or no. Do it, don't do it. Right? I'm asking you to bury me. Don't bury me in Mitzrayim. Bury me in Eretz Yisrael. Did I ask you to do it yourself? No. Did I ask you to do it and break all the the rules and the guides and everything? No. I asked you to not bury me. Whatever that has to do, that's involved in that, that's up to you. So here he's saying is whatever, and usually by the way, in our own experiences, right? When we do something when someone asks us to do something and we do it, they're like, thank you. But if you do something above and beyond, you make it even nicer, you polish it, or you do something nice, they're like, whoa, that was just like extra. That I'm going to give you something for. I'm going to really, the tip, whatever, anything you do, right? That's where Yaakov is going with this kind of idea. And he says, look, the Gemara in Sota again mentions, and he says, "Shalafisha ginavu mishchem hu tzarchu lachziro l'shchem v'ra'ui shetiyesh shalog legamrei kidei sheyeh kavur b'nachlato dafka." The Gemara in Sota mentions the idea that a person, it's a real schut for a person to be buried in the place that they lived. It's a schut. That's what the Gemara in Sota says. So Yaakov says, I need to make this close this full circle. He says, this is where Shechem is, where everything started. I want you, Yosef, to get Shechem to make everything, show everyone that where it started, everything's back into one nice big circle, nice package, right? It says, "Sharei ve'shiv etchem, mashma shekol banav yachzru la'eretz Yisrael, k'sheyivkod et Yisrael ve'met kachaya she'af atzmot hashvatim alum Yosef." So I have a question with this pasuk in a second, in the statement, not a pasuk. The Midrash says that all the Shvatim died in Mitzrayim, and all the Shvatim were brought back. That's the Midrash, not me. I didn't make that up. The Midrash says that all the Shvatim died in Mitzrayim. We know that, but when we know that it says, what's that? No, just the Shvatim. That's the 12 tribes. The actual Shvatim, right? The actual tribes, not the people, not the whole 600,000, whatever, right? So it's now 70 family, not the family of 70, but rather 7 of 12, family of 12. Right, the 12 of the line, the children of Yaakov, all of them died in Mitzrayim, and all of their bones were taken up to Eretz Yisrael. Now, in the next sentence, I have a question on it. Yaakov is saying even though the reason why I'm giving you an extra piece, he's saying is the extra credit is because I see that everyone's going to come out of Mitzrayim, and there's going to be an opportunity for everyone, for you, Yosef, as your body's going to come out, and everyone's body's going to come out, and for that, you're getting that extra credit. Now the question is, now the next sentence, which ends the Torah, I have a question on. I don't know the answer to it. Moshe he'elami Mitzrayim. So Moshe, according to the way I read it, Moshe, it says here, Yosef merited that Moshe would bring up the bones of. Moshe would bring up his bones, as we know in Bishalach. It says, "Vayikach atzmot Yosef imo." Moshe takes the bones of Yosef with him, and we know what happens. What do we say in Halal? Hayam ra'av vayanos. What happens? The waters saw the bones of Yosef and split. So now he says, but now my question to that is, didn't we just say, right before that, we just had that Midrash Rabbah says that all the 12 Shvatim died. Wouldn't Moshe want to do what? Take the bones of Levi. If I'm saying is, if we're going under the understand, right? Moshe's a Levi, right? If we're saying that Moshe wants to take the schut of his grandfather or of that line, then he should take his grandfather's, atzmot. I don't know. What?
But didn't Yosef explicitly request it?
I think he did, but even so, either we're saying that all the Shvatim go up, and therefore Moshe should say, my grandfather, that's a schut. Yeah, even if though Yosef requested it, he should still say that's the schut. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know the answer. Lama What's the answer? Yeah, what is the answer? Yeah.
You're maksheh on the pshat from a midrash.
That's probably right. Okay, could be.
Meaning.
Right.
It doesn't say pshat.
Right. The
the
Shvatim.
alu.
Right.
So you're saying the midrash says the Shvatim alu. Why doesn't the pshat say that Moshe?
It could be. It could very well be. That could just be the simple one.
It's amazing to think we have all the Kvarim around us.
Right.
And Ben Yaakov is right next to Beit Shemesh.
Yeah. And it says here. Right. It says Moshe he'elam Mitzrayim. Moshe took them up was merited to take up the Atzmot Yosef. V'ikach Moshe Atzmot Yosef. V'lama zocheh Yosef shitasek bo Moshe. Why did Yosef merit that Moshe would be the one bringing him up? Ella v'day mipnei Yosef zacha ba'atzmot aviv. So he's saying is rather, and that's I had the question from this statement. Is he's saying is because Yosef was mitasek with the body of his father, so Moshe was zocheh, or Yosef was zocheh that Moshe would be mitasek with his body. That my question is, if you're dealing with the father, then all the more so is my question. But I can hear what you're saying. Either way, the idea here, the short piece here, is that we can see that that the value and the merit of doing extra, that extra mile that person goes, whether it's a nice thing, whether it's something that we do, and we know that something about the person, and we go the extra mile that you do for someone else does have an impact. It does make an impact on the other person. It does make an impact bichlal. And we always all the stories that all these big stories about Gedolim, it's not about the story that, he did a nice thing for a person. It's the extra effort that he put in, right? There's a story, I forgot many stories, but there are many stories of tzaddikim who say, this person is doing something, needs something. I'm not just going to ask my little, lackey to go do it. I'm going to do it myself to show out of itlavut for the thing. And that extra one is what really brings the person to really appreciate and really elevates the person to Gedulah. So it's just something about going that extra mile. Let's see. That was number 2. Let's see if we can get a third one in, which we probably could. So let me just find the one I want to do.
All right, while you're looking for it.
Yeah.
The Koach says,
Right.
which is kind of what we're saying here.
Exactly. Right.
But ultimately, you do get Sakkal.
No, of course. That's that.
Even you shouldn't be doing it for the Sakkal.
Right.
But if you do it and you do it Moshe Tzarich, you'll get the Sakkal.
Right. So that's what we say every day. I was just learning with my daughter for her bagrut. We were learning. It says, what does it say? What do we say? Right. And then we say, what do we say? After that, what do we say? We say is a Karen. No, sorry. How does it go? Right. A Karen Lamazeva. No, sorry. No, the other way around. Right. So what exactly? My brain is not a little shut off already. So we're saying the peirot, right? The most mefarshim is the fruits. We get the benefit, the fruits of the tree now, but the principle is later on, which would be which is the opposite of the logical. What the logic would be is give me the principle now, and I'll pay for the fruits later, right? That's how we usually get, right? The interest later. So he says no. The real, the schar, everything you get, the fruit is just a secondary benefit of what you're planting, all the seeds that you're planting now is, you're planting for the future. And that's what you have to realize what the mitzvot and extra work we do. Along this line, Drush Ted Zayin, hopefully we'll get through it. If not, go ahead, tell the story. Go ahead.
So my uncle, his children wanted to cremate him.
Right.
And Hashem was able to talk them out of it. And when I was at the floor there, it was you don't think about funerals as something like, it's so pleasurable. There was an experience of hana, some kind of shechina there was nothing ever I ever experienced like it or ever will experience like it. And at a certain time, that mamash was miyuchad for the kfura. I had no idea what it was. It was just, I could never even replicate that feeling. So that was like a little taste of the Olam Haba.
Right. We all go through that moments of life where we do something, we're just like that moment you're like, wow, that was it. Like that's what it should feel like. We should all merit to get that at that point where we go everything we do. But the truth is, you're right. There are things when you go the extra mile and you work so hard for something, and that little bit of schar that you get, you may not get schar now, but later down the line you're like, wow, that extra. You most of the time we don't get the thank you, we don't get the tip, we don't get the extra thing. But later on, someone will give you that extra thing, and you'll be like, "Oh, finally, appreciate it." A lot of times, I have to say, is like, every one of us, I'm sure, was or is hard on their teacher or someone, influential on their life, right? You have an opportunity sometimes down the line. You kind of say to them, "I know that I'm still in touch with my 7th grade teacher, my 7th grade Rebbe," and every time I say to him, I remind him of the things that, the hard times, but I also remind him how much influence he was an aide at my own wedding. He signed my ketubah. I was at my ketubah. He's now the rabbi of my parents' shul. And I just the other day, I saw a picture of him and my father at my own engagement party, and I sent it to him, and he said, "You have no idea how much your father influenced me." As he was influenced by my father, actually at the Shiva, he told me that my father was instrumental in him getting a doctorate. This Rav, was going to throw in the towel. He was like, "I just can't, too many hard people, giving him a hard time." And my father said, "Don't worry about it," calmed him down. And he said, "Whatever it takes, just come to me." That's what my father said to him. "Whatever it takes, come to me and I'll take care of it." And that's what he did. I never knew that to this day. Till that day. Anyway, so if we look at the last drush of this parsha, it's very similar to what we just learned, and that's why it's a good way to end. And if we look, the Zera Shimshon generally, not always, generally tries to find one piece of Torah about the Haftorah of that relevant of the Parsha. Generally tries to do it. He doesn't always, but almost always he finds some sort of drush or makes a drush on the Parsha. So when we know is that right before David HaMelech dies, David commands and tells Shlomo, what does he tell Shlomo to do? To use it, right, to make sure that Shimi ben Gera, what does he do? We know that Shimi ben Gera was a very big, cursed Avshalom. Right? What happened?
Cursed David HaMelech,
Cursed David HaMelech, and what happened?
and David HaMelech told his son and
To make sure to take care of. Right.
David first had to.
Right. David didn't want to do it himself. He felt that would not be the right thing to do. But he said, he says, I trust you. You'll take care of it. Wink, wink. Right.
You're going to take care of it.
Right. Exactly. So now that's right. That's the end, and that's the Haftorah. Right. And he says, Shlomo tells Shimi ben Gera. It's in Malachim. He says Shlomo Melech tells Shimi ben Gera that the time you leave your house, you're stuck. You're living within these quarters. As soon as you leave the house, it's out of my hands already. I'm taking
Hunting season.
right. It's hunting season. Right. It's right. So he says 3 years later, and this is what the Navi says.
That he lost his donkey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good. Very good. 3 years later, two of his Mishartim leave. They leave Yerushalayim, and it just so happens that Shimi ben Gera, out of haste, runs out after them, and then Shlomo says, "Dude, you broke the promise," and that's what happened. So now he says, right, and he says. So now the question that we asked earlier is why did the question that he says is like this: Pasuk Melachim vayishlach hamelech vayikra l'Shimi vayomer elav halo ishbiticha b'Hashem va'id b'cha le'mor b'yom tzedcha. Right, Shlomo is having a conversation with Shimi ben Gera, and he says, "Didn't I tell you? Didn't I make you a swear, an oath? Right, saying that on the day that you leave, right." So and then he says, "Madua lo shamarta shvuat Hashem et mitzvah asher tziviti alecha." Why didn't you keep that promise? Right, of course. Shimon ben Gera has an easy out. He says, listen, I was running after my servants, right? But he forgot, we all do that. Out of haste of something, we forget all the other things that are going on. We just kind of get in the heat of the moment. So he says, why did Shlomo even have to do this to make Shimon ben Gera make an oath, right? And why does it? And also to command him not to do so. David varachad, right? Either you say to him, make me a swear, or make me an oath, swear to me that you're not going to go out, or tell me, or just say, don't go out, right? Or say to him, don't go out, right? One of the two is enough. Why does he have to do both? He's going to follow the Zera Shimshon, and this one is following the line or the direction of thought that we learned originally, which is what Yaakov Avinu did, and I think that's why we don't know necessarily always the connection between the two, the Haftorah and the Parsha. In this case, I think that the connection is probably more about the relationship between someone coming to the near death. Yaakov is almost coming to his death, and he dies, and David HaMelech is dying. That's the connection here, but maybe this one is another connection. And he says, how could Shimi ben Gera have the audacity, the chutzpah, to go across, to violate the king's command? We know that Shimi ben Gera, even though he may not have been the most favorite person of the world in the David HaMelech's eyes, he definitely was a very wise person, and he was definitely respected by David before what happened. So he says we have to understand. Excuse me. Damrina bebeit Yosef Yoredea Siman Reish Yud b'Shem HaMa'arik Shoresh, and he says Shoresh Kuf Yud Bet, and the Beit Yosef says on Yoredea, and he says Al Ruvain Shenishba Lifra Shimon. Right? He says a man named Ruvain owes money to Shimon, and Ruvain makes an oath that he's going to repay him. Be'er Ploni Shadarba Shimon Bion Ploni. He says He says, I made a promise that I'm going to repay you on this day, and you live in this location. Okay? For whatever reason, right, the time comes that he has to be repaid, and for whatever reason, Shimon can no longer be in that city, whatever the reason is, right? Ones. Ima ir shomet sham Shimon ata ina rechoka mi Reuven yoter mima shayta ir rishona. Chayav Reuven lelech sham lifrod Shimon. Right? Let's say the city was now, it's not too much further than the original city. You have an obligation to go after him and say, okay, I have to find you and I pay you back. Right? Chayav Reuven lelech sham lifrod Shimon. Af al pi shelo yizkir b'shvato ela ir shayav omed sham Shimon beitahi. He says, but even though I said I'm going to pay you back in this city at this day and this time, now the promise is no longer valid, because you would think that the promise is no longer valid. Why? Because the guy doesn't live in that city anymore. But because even so, because the distance of the city is not much further, the halacha mentions how much further. Either way, he says Marich. It gives one answer. He says Vim Tomar Ech Tachol Hashua Ma Shelo Yotzi Mipiv. Right? How can you say that the shua is still valid even though the person's promise is no longer valid because the location has changed? Right? It's not the case when he says, right? So he says it's not the case. No, it's not right? Because we know that with promises, with oaths, with shvuot, right? Whatever I say is chal. Right? Whatever I don't say is not chal. So he says that you would think that that's not the case. That's the case. Right? It's different when I make a promise to a friend of mine, in order to ensure that he will fulfill every situation. In the case where the purpose of the shvuah was to ensure repayment, right? Therefore, will be made as stipulated. Right? So this thing, so he says that a shvuah obligates a person to fulfill whatever comes out of my mouth, right? Meaning that if I stipulate it's in this city, it has to be in this city that I repay you. If I'm not in that city, even though you would think that therefore the condition is therefore no longer valid, and therefore the whole shvuah is no longer valid, the halacha is not. That's not the case. I'm not the Zera Shimshon, but if I were the Zera Shimshon, I would have just said let's learn from what we just learned about Yaakov and Yosef and to make a condition. Like it's this very similar kind of model, so let's just use that as the model. But I think that's what he doesn't really go that direction, but I would have gone with that direction. Anyways, right? On one hand, I could say what? I could say, listen, I never thought, it doesn't really, like what I usually say. You say, okay, I'm going to pay you back at this day and this place. You move? Okay, whatever. Like I never thought that it's going to only, what I'm saying is, it means that I have to obligate myself to this place and this time, right? It means that I'm going to repay you. I don't really mean this place and this time. It just means, I'm just saying that, but it doesn't have to be that, right? And he says, while he would take care of one matter, he would also take care of another. Right? Like, in other words, I'll pay you back in a month. In a month from now, right, I'll be like, oh yeah, I got to deal with something else, so I'll pay you on that same day, right? But all of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute, I'm no longer in that. In a month from now, I know I'm going to be in Yerushalayim, so I'm going to pay you back in a month from now. Wait, now all of a sudden, right? Now all of a sudden, you're not in Yerushalayim on that day. I had plans to be on that day. Now what? Right? Now what happens? So he says, right? Even so, we say that because if it's Yerushalayim and now he's in Modi'in, because they're pretty much equal distance from each other, meaning from Efrat, right? From Efrat to Modi'in and Efrat to Yerushalayim, they're pretty close to each other, not much further from each other, and therefore you are obligated, even though you said that I'm making plans to go to Yerushalayim in a month from now and I owe you money, the halacha is that you have to go chase after him, even though it's not that much further. So now he says, what's the reason? Because he says that right? So he says what's the reason? It's obvious to us. Why did Shimon say I'm going to pay you back in Yerushalayim? Is because what? I want to make it convenient for me to get paid. Right? He didn't think that all of a sudden I'm going to have to make, who's to know that in a month from now something's going to happen where I'm no longer going to be in Yerushalayim. So that's what he's saying here. Now he says he's going to apply, Zera Shimshon is going to apply this logic as well. Afkan Shimi haya sover sho il sheshlomo amar lo bnei lecha bayit b'Yerushalayim. Shimi reasons for a second with Shlomo. He says that when Shlomo says to Shimi ben Gera, you have to stay in Yerushalayim. build yourself a house in Yerushalayim. Shema min adekapid shelo yilech ladur chutz miYerushalayim. Right? Dafka al beit dira shelo yilech ladur chutz miYerushalayim. He says that Shimi's understanding is that it was only the location of Shimi's place. Meaning, what does that mean? He's saying is that Shimi should believe that Shlomo was only commanding him not to reside outside of Yerushalayim. What?
Domicile.
Right. He has to reside here in Yerushalayim. He can't leave anywhere outside Yerushalayim. V'gam hu lo alach ladur. And indeed, when Shimi did leave Yerushalayim, he didn't do so to live outside of Yerushalayim. Shimon ben Gera understood Shlomo Melech to say is, you can't leave Yerushalayim to live. Meaning, you can't live anywhere outside of Yerushalayim.
But place of business.
Right. Your main residence has to be, your primary residence has to be Yerushalayim. You can't leave Yerushalayim. What did Shlomo Melech mean? Shlomo Melech said, you can't leave. Physically leave Yerushalayim. Shimon ben Gera understood it to say is, I can't leave to live somewhere outside of Yerushalayim. I can go anywhere. If I have to go do business somewhere else and come back, that's fine. So he says here, Amnam Sham Kamosha Parasha Kliyakar. The Kliyakar is not the one that the Kliyakar that we know of in the Chumash. It's a different Kliyakar. Amnam Shlomo Amarlo Halo Davar Yadush En Li Shum Hanaa B'Shva Zo Elu V'Kayim Mitzvot Avi. Right? Shlomo Melech is saying is, I have no Hanaa in this one. The only Hanaa I have is that my father made me promise it, which is similar to what Yaakov and Yosef had the similar situation. I don't care about the location of your house. Right? My intention is that you should never leave, right? Meaning you have to fulfill my promise to the whole thing. So you can't just start dissecting start reading into it.
This doesn't answer a question. Why didn't you do it at all?
So why did you do the oath in the second? All right, so that's a good question. Now, that's the second part. We don't think we have time for it. We don't have time for it. The second part of the question, like you said, is why did you make him do an oath? One or the other. He's either make a promise, an oath.
Clearly he's looking to trip him up.
I don't think he's looking to trip him up. I think he was trying to make it.
He wanted to find legitimize. He wanted to legitimize.
Right. So I think he was trying to put in a situation where basically he knew that something was going to happen. Whether
why would if he didn't do that, then what? It looks like simple, like low level, gutter level, like revenge.
Right. So this way, he kind of puts him into a situation where he says, "You're stuck." Right. So he knows that at some point along the line he's going to trip up. Right. Right. How do we know right? Everyone messes up. The question is, when does that mess up happen? Does the mess up happen right away, or does it happen when they're under pressure? And then this is a situation when he was under pressure. Shimi ben Gera, he could have said, it's just my servants, no big deal, I'll run it. But here he's saying he ran after them because.
Think about how it would have looked if we just went up and killed them.
Right, exactly. It would look bad. He said, your father told him to do it, so he's doing it. But it's this way, and by the way, that's why Shlomo Melech didn't do it himself. He sent out his henchmen to do it, so that way he was just like, I wasn't really responsible. The real answer, the way I view it, I didn't go through the whole thing